As we head into the round of 8 at Las Vegas this weekend, I thought now was the perfect time to invite Fox's Bob Pockrass for another visit on the channel and talk about the season, the remaining 4 races, and who can possibly beat Kyle Larson, and of course, the off-track stuff, including the charters and the recent controversies in the sport. And I'd like to welcome back to the channel from Fox Sports, Bob Pockrass. Hey, Bob, I appreciate you joining me today.
It's great to be here with you, Kyle.
Yeah, and I also want to thank you for joining me as the last leg of the Bob Pockrass media tour, because I saw earlier this week you were with the guys on Door Bumper Clear, and then you were also on Kevin Harvick's Happy Hour podcast. So I appreciate you wrapping up the tour with me. I will say that folks need to go check out your interview on with Caitlin Vincey and Mamba Smith on the Happy Hour podcast, because it really provides really good background information on your career, including upsetting Bob Knight. Who knew? I didn't realize that you had gone to Indiana, and that great story with Bob Knight. So I encourage everyone to go check that out. So let's start today, Bob, with the real hard-hitting question. And that is, last week at the kickball tournament, Corey LaJoie's kickball tournament, and you mentioned it in the Happy Hour podcast about how you almost had this run-in with Bubba Wallace. And so when I was watching it, all I could think was like when Noah Gragson jumped over the wall, and I think there were a couple guys that made some awkward slides into like second base. All I could think was, what happens if one of these guys gets injured? And, we have a Chase Elliott situation and they have to miss races because of a kickball tournament. And so you talked about this incident, close incident with Bubba Wallace. So kind of tell me about that.
Well, I think we were the ball was coming, and I think it was going over where I was, over my head or something. But I just know, like, I turned around and he was kind of coming toward me, and I was like, oh, and so made sure to kind of move out of the way. I think he saw me. I think he knew he was going to have to slow up, but you just don't want to. Anybody get hurt. Somebody gets hurt. I mean, there have been people who've gotten hurt, just no drivers in that event. I think just like any other athletic competition, especially maybe sometimes people who don't, I don't play kickball every day. So, sometimes you put yourself in a position that you're not, that you probably shouldn't, or that you just, that just can cause things to happen. So, but luckily everybody was okay. It looked like everybody was walking fine, and it was all good.
All right. So let's move on to one of the big stories this week, and that's obviously the lawsuit with 2311. And I just wrote down some things because I will tell folks that they need to go check out foxsports.com, and you've got like a primer on there that really gives the background on the case, and it looks like you're providing updates on it. So this week, NASCAR responded to the team's request for the expedited production. And the big headline and the big takeaway for me was NASCAR is planning for the 2025 season with 32 charters instead of the normal 36. So kind of just tell me where you think things are, Bob, and kind of where they're headed.
Yeah. So what we didn't know was whether, because 2311 and Front Row had not signed their charter agreements, would NASCAR just sell those charters? Could they operate those charters themselves? There was some things that potentially they could do, but it sounds like from their response that they would go with 32 charters and what we would assume to be 8 open cars then for next season. Of course, we don't know is, Stuart Haas is supposed to sell a charter to 2311.
Right.
We're supposed to sell a charter to Front Row. NASCAR has to approve those transfers. They can't really approve them until until the sale is complete at the end of the year. So what we don't know is whether NASCAR would approve those transfers. Would those teams be able to operate with one charter, or would then there just really be 30 charter teams until the suit gets settled?
Wow, it's so messy, and it just seems like there's so many unknowns at this point, and it just feels like every week there's something new that keeps coming out. I mean, I don't know where it's going to go, but do you get a sense that this is something that's going to happen? It's going to be resolved quickly, or do you feel like this is something that could drag on for months, if not years?
I think it could drag on for years. I mean, great, certainly settle anytime, but you have this decision coming up on a preliminary injunction. You have a hearing November 4th. Could that be appealed? I think injunction ruling can be appealed. So the NASCAR doesn't even have to answer to the actual lawsuit till early December. So I think there will be a motion by NASCAR to just throw it out, where they would ask the judge to say, "Hey, believe everything that 2311 Front Row says. We still didn't break the law." So that will probably be their first step. And if the judge doesn't throw it out, then this thing can go on for a year, 2 or 3 years, unless they settle.
Okay. So there was another really interesting story that came out this week about Joe Gibbs Racing, and reportedly an engineer stole some intellectual property and some information and sold it to another team. So I know Jennifer Fryer reported on this. So have you heard anything more about this and kind of what's going on? And if you've heard of something about like this before, because it's really an intriguing story.
Well, certainly you hear things about people who go from one team to another and what they take, and typically you can take kind of what's in your head, but you can't take setup sheets or documents. This issue we've been hearing about for a couple of months. It's not something necessarily new, but beyond that, I'm still trying to decipher what's fact in this case.
Okay. So I know you were on the call with the NBC Sports guys with me the other day, and I asked the question about the controversial calls as of late. So we had Talladega a couple of weeks ago with the towing policy and the damaged vehicle policy. And then last week, in the Xfinity series, we had the ending with the delayed yellow and then the shortcutting of the chicane. So I know you and I have talked before, and you obviously have a wealth of history in this sport, which I don't. So I'm just curious, do you feel like this year that NASCAR has made more self-inflicted mistakes like we've seen of late? Because I get a sense, and when people respond to my videos, the fans are frustrated because why does this keep happening? So do you feel like this is just on par, or is it more escalated this season?
I think that they certainly haven't had the best of years. I think it kind of comes and goes. I think, especially in the playoff time, this is probably one of the more times where it seems to have cropped up a few times in the playoffs. It's the part of this playoff system, right? If you can't have the playoff system and somebody gets a raw deal on a call in one of 36 races, you kind of feel like they'll get the benefit of a call in one or two of 36 races, and it's not as big a deal. But with this system, the onus is on NASCAR to be perfect in the tower, be perfect in their calls, and certainly they've struggled with communication of how they're going to do things in some ways, and then obviously you saw the end of the Xfinity race, which was the hard part there is that when you talk about 20 seconds for a car that's buried underneath the tires, really we're kind of focused on the wrong thing. We're focused on what it did to Parker Kligerman, when I feel like you should be focused on the fact that it took him 20 seconds. I don't care whether it's first lap or the last lap.
Right.
Shouldn't take that long to throw the caution and get safety workers out there.
Right. All right, so let's move on to some racing talk, and we're wrapping up the season. So I kind of wanted to just talk about one or two things here, and that is, who is your biggest surprise, pleasant surprise this year so far, and who would you say is your biggest disappointment as far as a driver is concerned in their season?
That's a great question. I mean, I think you look at Chase Briscoe, right, and you say, well, that's a pleasant surprise, especially from where they started. They're able to win the last race, get in the playoffs. I think for a full season, the pleasant surprise is Todd Gilliland. Been top 20 to 25 in points all year. Mm-hmm. Significant improvement over last year, and just really coming into his own. And, I think the disappointment has to be Kyle Busch, right? When you've won a race every year for 19 years and you haven't won yet, that's going to be disappointing. And Grant, he came within inches, a couple of times. Yeah. I would say consistency for him has been disappointing, but he certainly has had races that he could win.
Right. And, talking about Kyle Busch's former team and Joe Gibbs Racing and the Toyotas, I find it really interesting since Michigan, actually, that was their last win. So we've gone 2 months ago today that they last won. What do you attribute to the struggles with Toyota?
Well, I mean, I'd say some of it's the tracks. Road courses haven't been their strong point. So since then, you've had a couple of road courses. and and the fact is that they have fewer cars, right? Than everybody else. So so they have fewer chances to win. But I mean, I think you look at Christopher Bell's been relatively strong week in and week out. I think obviously you've had Truex's struggles. Ty Gibbs, kind of hasn't been as great as he kind of was during the regular season, and Denny Hamlin, he's up and down. So again, Tyler Reddick, it's just how awful playoffs, right? When's he gonna get going? Now, granted, gritty performance on Sunday at the Roval, but still, just maybe not. They haven't necessarily been up near the front as much as we would have expected.
Right. And then last question, Bob. First of all, can you do you have a final four? Who do you think is going to make the final four?
Yeah, I think it'll be Byron, Larson, Hamlin, and Bell. Those would be my four. Those I think were my four at the start of the playoffs. And I would say that, there's about of these final eight, I would say the one that I probably didn't have in there before this playoff started was Joey Logano. So I would say he's kind of maybe the biggest surprise of the playoffs. Not, I mean, he's two-time champ, but still they haven't had the regular season that they thought should have.
All right. And then to follow up on that, I was just going through the numbers for Kyle Larson, and he won 10 times in 2021, and then he kind of tapered off these first couple of years, but now he's won 6 times in 2024. And just looking back as far as laps led, and it's comparable to what he did in 2021. Do you see anybody dethroning him? And I know it's the playoffs and they set up Phoenix for that, anybody can win. But unless they beat themselves, do you see anybody taking away the championship from Kyle Larson this year?
No, and yes. I mean, Christopher Bell's been so strong at Phoenix and New Hampshire that Christopher Bell's in the Final Four. They're going to be tough to beat. But if Kyle Larson's team brings its A game and they don't beat themselves, Kyle Larson's going to be hoisting the trophy at Phoenix.
Right. I agree. I just don't see, based on the numbers and how he's performed as of late, I find it hard that someone can dethrone or take the title away from him. All right, Bob, I really appreciate your time. As always, great information. Look forward to reading your information and your stories here in the coming weeks as we close out the 2024 campaign. Again, appreciate your time and have a good weekend this weekend at Las Vegas.
All right. Thank you, Kyle.